Still think I'm the starving artist?
I was sitting in my home workshop Thursday afternoon, surrounded by the familiar chaos of paint-splattered canvases, glowing computer monitors, and half-completed digital art projects scattered everywhere. The air smelled like coffee and turpentine, and my fingers were stained with acrylic from experimenting earlier. Just another ordinary day in what everyone believed was my struggling artist's life. Then my phone buzzed on the cluttered desk, cutting through the peaceful hum of creativity. I glanced down, expecting some mundane text from Jessica about picking up groceries or reminding me about some family obligation. Instead, it was a notification from Forbes magazine that made my heart skip several beats. Forbes Billionaire Rankings. Meet the anonymous digital art revolutionary behind a $6.20 billion NFT empire. And there it was. My real name printed in bold letters, staring back at me like some surreal nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I blinked hard, rubbed my tired eyes, and read it again. Still there. No going back now. The weight of revelation hit me gradually, like cold water slowly filling a cracked foundation. For 14 long years, I had successfully maintained this elaborate charade. My actual life, not the fabricated version everyone believed they knew so well. Jessica, my wife of 14 years, along with her parents Vincent and Helen, plus her entire extended family, had always seen me as the perpetually struggling creative type, barely scraping by on random freelance gigs and impractical hobby projects that never seemed to amount to anything substantial. I had deliberately let them maintain this illusion because it seemed infinitely easier than constantly explaining myself, easier than enduring their skeptical questions and condescending lectures about practicality and financial responsibility. But now, with this Forbes bombshell exploding across the internet, the carefully constructed mask was finally cracking apart. Sitting prominently on my desk was an elegant gold-embossed invitation for the annual Crawford family reunion happening this weekend at Vincent and Helen's sprawling countryside estate. I had been privately dreading this gathering for weeks, knowing it would be another uncomfortable exercise in playing the role they expected from me. Just yesterday, Jessica had cornered me with that familiar sharp tone in her voice, saying, "Please just try not to embarrass everyone this time." What she really meant was, don't show up wearing those paint-stained jeans that looked like they came from a thrift store bargain bin. Don't ramble on endlessly about obscure digital art concepts that nobody present would care about or understand. Don't give her father Vincent yet another obvious reason to look down his aristocratic nose at me with barely concealed disgust and disappointment. I had nodded silently and kept my mouth shut, exactly like I always did in these situations. But now, with that damning Forbes article glowing accusingly on my phone screen, everything felt fundamentally different. The ground beneath my carefully constructed false identity was shifting in ways I hadn't fully anticipated. I leaned back in my creaky office chair, staring up at the paint-speckled ceiling, my mind racing through the implications. How had this even happened so publicly? I knew it was inevitable eventually. My brilliant assistant Diana had been warning me repeatedly over the past few months that various financial journalists were starting to investigate my business operations with increasing persistence and accuracy. She possesses this uncanny ability to stay ahead of potential problems, always maintaining that characteristic, deadpan voice while delivering news with ruthless efficiency. "They're connecting the dots," she had informed me during our last phone conversation. "No unnecessary emotion, just cold, hard facts, delivered with surgical precision. Your days of anonymity are officially numbered. Better prepare for the spotlight." I had casually shrugged off her warnings at the time, instructing her to keep our private jet on standby and ensure the island retreat was properly maintained, just in case we needed to disappear quickly. But actually seeing it published, seeing my carefully guarded name definitively linked to words like billionaire and mogul in a major publication, felt like someone had violently kicked the legs out from under my stable world. Jessica didn't know the truth. Her parents remained completely oblivious. None of them had any idea whatsoever. For 14 exhausting years, I had meticulously played the exact part they wanted and expected me to play. The chronically broke dreamer married to their perfect, accomplished daughter. The guy they could safely pity and condescend to at every holiday gathering and family celebration. I drove that ancient, rust-covered pickup truck everywhere, deliberately wore clothes that appeared to be salvaged from charity donation bins, and consistently allowed them to pick up restaurant tabs whenever we dined together. Why maintain such an elaborate deception? Because every single time I had attempted to explain my actual work, to share my excitement about blockchain technology, NFTs, and the revolutionary digital galleries I was secretly developing, they would either laugh dismissively or roll their eyes like I was a particularly naive child playing with expensive toys. "That's adorable," Vincent had once said, patronizingly patting my shoulder, exactly like I was a 7-year-old showing off a crayon drawing. "But maybe focus on something more realistic and stable." So I eventually stopped trying to convince them and simply built my empire in complete secrecy instead. Now the secret was definitively out, and I honestly couldn't decide whether to laugh hysterically or panic completely. I picked up my phone again, scrolling methodically through the comprehensive article. It contained virtually everything about my journey. My very first NFT collection released 14 years ago. The anonymous platform I had launched that exploded across the internet like wildfire. The massive licensing deals, strategic acquisitions, and partnership agreements that had generated astronomical profits. They even included a photograph of me from some random technology conference I had spoken at several years back, one I had completely forgotten about participating in. Reclusive, they called me in the article. I suppose that description was reasonably accurate. I had deliberately stayed out of the public spotlight, kept my head down, and allowed my innovative work to speak for itself without unnecessary personal publicity. But $6.2 billion. That staggering number stared back at me, cold and brutally real. I had known my ventures were performing exceptionally well financially. Hell, I had purchased that private Caribbean island last year without thinking twice about the expense. But seeing my net worth laid out so starkly made the entire situation feel significantly bigger and more overwhelming than I had previously imagined. And the timing couldn't have been more problematic. In just 2 days, I would be walking into that family reunion, facing Jessica's relatives with absolutely no way to hide anymore. No possibility of maintaining the comfortable fiction they had all grown accustomed to believing about my supposed failures and limitations. I set the phone down carefully and ran both hands through my hair, trying desperately to think clearly through the chaos. Jessica would inevitably see this article soon, if she hadn't discovered it already. Her phone was constantly buzzing with news alerts and social media notifications. She loved staying informed about current events, loved knowing important information before everyone else in her social circle discovered it. What would her reaction be? What would she actually say when confronted with this earth-shattering revelation? Just last night, we had been standing together in our kitchen. She was chopping vegetables for dinner while I pretended to help with meal preparation. She had sighed dramatically and said, "I really wish you would figure out something more stable and reliable. You know, my parents keep asking when you're finally going to grow up and act like a responsible adult." I had simply smiled, nodded agreeably, and let her criticism roll off me exactly like I always did. Stable and reliable. She had absolutely no conception of just how stable my situation actually was. And her parents. Dear God, Vincent and Helen were the absolute worst examples of old money snobbery, perpetually stiff and judgmental, constantly acting like I was some charity case they had magnanimously allowed into their refined family by permitting me to marry their precious daughter. Helen, with her fake plastic smiles that never reached her cold eyes. Vincent, with his endless pompous lectures about real work and genuine achievement. They had spent 14 years looking at me like I was nothing more than an annoying inconvenience, a disappointment they had to tolerate. And now, suddenly, they would be forced to swallow every single condescending word they had ever spoken about my supposed lack of ambition and success. I stood up abruptly, pacing restlessly around my cluttered studio, my boots scuffing against the hardwood floor with each agitated step. The elegant invitation caught my attention again, sitting there looking all proper and formal. 2 days. Just 2 days until I would walk into that reunion and they would all finally know the complete truth about who I really was and what I had actually accomplished. Part of me desperately wanted to call Diana immediately, tell her to fire up the jet and fly me somewhere far away where I could sit on a tropical beach and let this entire controversy blow over naturally. But another part of me, the much stronger and more vindictive part, genuinely wanted to see their shocked faces when reality finally hit them. I wanted to watch Vincent's smug, superior grin falter and crumble. I wanted to watch Helen's precious pearls tremble as she clutched them in disbelief. I wanted to watch Jessica try desperately to figure out how she could have possibly missed something this monumentally significant about her own husband. For 14 years, I had been essentially invisible to them, nothing more than a shadow drifting through their perfect, privileged little world. But not anymore. The truth was finally out in the open, and it belonged entirely to me now. I stopped pacing abruptly, grabbed my phone with renewed determination, and texted Diana. "Article is live. Plan revelation starts immediately." Her reply appeared within seconds, characteristically short and efficiently sharp. "On it. Everything's ready." I took a deep, steadying breath, feeling adrenaline beginning to pump through my veins. This was it. The elaborate mask was finally off, and I was completely ready to step confidently into the bright spotlight. I was still processing the shock of the Forbes revelation when my phone buzzed again insistently. This time, it wasn't another news notification. It was Kevin, Jessica's younger brother, calling me directly. I stared at his name flashing on the screen like a warning signal. Kevin was typically the loudest member of the family, always joking around, constantly poking fun at me for being what he called the starving artist. I figured he had definitely seen the article by now. No way he would miss something this explosively newsworthy. I swiped to answer, holding the phone against my ear while leaning against my cluttered desk. "Hey, Kevin," I said, keeping my voice carefully steady like nothing unusual was happening. "You're seriously on the Forbes billionaire list?" he blurted out immediately. No polite greeting, no casual warm-up conversation, just straight to the shocking point. His voice was pitched higher than normal, almost squeaky, like he couldn't quite believe what he was reading. "Billionaire? Are you in some kind of witness protection program or something? What the hell is going on here?" I could clearly hear the panic threading through his tone, the way he was desperately scrambling to make logical sense of this completely unexpected information. I let out a small laugh, more directed at myself than at him. "Yeah, it's really me," I said simply. "No witness protection involved, just me doing what I've always been doing." There was a long, uncomfortable pause on his end, like he was waiting for me to admit it was all an elaborate prank. When I didn't, he released a low whistle of amazement. "Holy crap," he muttered under his breath. "Jessica's going to absolutely lose her mind when she sees this. You realize that, right?" I didn't need to answer immediately. I already knew exactly what was coming. My phone's screen lit up with a text message notification. "Jessica," just a direct link to the Forbes article followed by 3 demanding words. What the hell? No emojis, no question marks, just that sharp, cold, demanding tone I knew so well. I could easily picture her sitting at her pristine desk in our living room, her perfectly styled hair pulled back in that professional way she preferred, her lips pressed together in a thin line as she stared at her phone screen in complete disbelief and growing anger. She hadn't called yet, hadn't stormed into my studio like I was half expecting her to do. Just that text message sitting there like a loaded weapon waiting to explode. I switched my attention back to Kevin, who was still rambling nervously. "I mean, seriously, you've been driving that completely rusted truck for years and years. You let Mom and Dad pay for our dinner just last month when we went out. What's the real deal here?" I rubbed my temple with my free hand, feeling a tension headache beginning to creep steadily up the back of my skull. "It's a very long story," I said, which wasn't technically a lie, but certainly wasn't the complete truth either. "Look, I'll see everyone at the reunion this weekend, okay? We can talk about everything then." I hung up before he could push for more details, dropping the phone onto my desk like it was burning my hand. They were all scrambling now, trying to process this information. I could feel their confusion and panic even through the phone. Kevin freaking out completely. Jessica stewing in angry silence. Probably her parents would be next once the news trickled up to their level of the family hierarchy. And me? I was just standing there in my familiar paint-splattered jeans. The exact same guy they had mocked and dismissed for years. Except now they would have to completely rewrite everything they thought they knew about me. I hadn't told anyone about my success. Not Jessica, definitely not her family, not even my own parents before they had passed away several years ago. I had maintained this illusion deliberately and purposefully. The beat-up truck I had purchased cheap 10 years ago maintained it just to blend in seamlessly with their expectations. The thrift store clothes were comfortable and practical, plus they helped maintain the deception. Letting them pay for dinner was just me biting my tongue, allowing them to feel generous and important while I sat quietly on a fortune they couldn't even begin to imagine. Why hadn't I said anything before? Because I had tried initially. Back in the very beginning, I had sat Jessica down seriously, shown her my detailed sketches for a blockchain art platform, carefully explained how NFT technology could revolutionize everything about how artists create and sell their work. She had smiled patiently, patted my hand condescendingly, and said, "That's really interesting, honey, but maybe you should focus on something more practical and realistic." Vincent had been much worse in his dismissive reaction. Every time I mentioned digital art or cryptocurrency, he would literally snort with derision and launch into another long-winded speech about how real men worked with their hands or wore business suits, not played around with computers like children. So I had eventually stopped talking about my work entirely, but I built my empire anyway, piece by piece in complete silence. I walked over to my window, pushing it open to let some fresh air into the stuffy room. The street outside looked so peaceful and normal, just a couple of neighborhood kids riding their bicycles and the distant hum of someone's lawnmower down the block. It all seemed so small and insignificant compared to the massive changes happening inside my head and heart. My phone buzzed again with another text, this time from the family group chat. Kevin had dropped the Forbes link with a string of shocked face emojis. Helen replied quickly with her characteristic prim tone. "Surely there must be some kind of mistake." No question mark. Just that dismissive attitude she always maintained, like she simply couldn't fathom me being anything other than a complete failure. I didn't respond to the group chat. Let them all stew in their confusion and disbelief. Jessica still hadn't called, which struck me as odd. She wasn't typically the type to sit quietly when she was angry or upset. She was usually all fire and explosive emotion, storming around dramatically until she got the answers she demanded. Maybe she was too shocked to move, or perhaps she was embarrassed. Finally realizing she had spent 14 years married to a billionaire without ever noticing, I turned away from the window, my eyes landing on a framed photograph sitting on my bookshelf. Me and Jessica at our wedding ceremony, both of us smiling like we owned the entire world. Back then, I genuinely thought I would eventually win her family over, prove myself through hard work and innovative ideas. But during that first year, Vincent had pulled me aside at Thanksgiving dinner, his voice low and serious with booze. "Art is just a hobby, son," he had said, sipping his expensive whiskey slowly. "You'll never properly provide for her with this nonsense. Come work for my company instead. I'll set you straight and teach you about real business." I had clenched my jaw, thanked him politely for his concern, and walked away without saying what I really thought. That night, I made a private promise to myself that he would eat every single condescending word someday. Not just him, but Helen, with her pitying looks, and Jessica with her frustrated sighs every time I tried to discuss my projects. I would make them all see what they had refused to acknowledge. And I had done exactly that, hadn't I? $6.2 billion later, here I was. But it didn't feel like a complete victory yet. It felt more like a dangerous storm about to break over all of us. I sank back into my chair, staring at Jessica's text message. "What the hell?" I could have texted back immediately, explained everything in detail. The late nights spent coding and developing, the business deals I had signed under various aliases and shell companies, the money accumulating steadily in accounts she never knew existed. But why should I have to explain myself now? She had never asked meaningful questions. None of them had ever shown genuine interest. They had assumed I was failing because that's exactly what they wanted to see. A guy who couldn't keep up with their refined, privileged world. I had let them think it, played along with their assumptions because it seemed easier than fighting their constant smirks and lectures about responsibility. But now, the complete truth was out there for everyone to see. And I wasn't going to apologize for my success or feel guilty about maintaining my privacy. The reunion was tomorrow. Tomorrow I would walk into that gathering, look them directly in the eye, and watch their entire narrative about me fall apart completely. I had kept the secret for 14 years, built an empire while they laughed and dismissed me. Now they would have to deal with the reality of who I actually was, and I was just getting started with my revelations. The next morning arrived with crystal clear skies and golden sunlight streaming through my workshop windows. I had slept surprisingly well, considering the magnitude of yesterday's revelation. Jessica hadn't come home at all last night. After storming out of my studio following our confrontation, she had sent a brief text around midnight, saying she was staying at her mother's house. No additional explanation, no follow-up conversation, just those simple words. I didn't bother replying. What was there left to say at this point? She needed time and space to process everything, and I needed to focus on what was coming next. Today was the day everything would change permanently. The reunion, the big reveal, the moment I had been unconsciously building toward for years. I rolled out of bed feeling surprisingly refreshed despite sleeping on the living room couch and immediately checked my phone. Diana had texted early. Luxury vehicles arrive at the Crawford estate in 90 minutes. Private jet is fueled and ready. Captain Rodriguez sends his regards. Everything is proceeding according to plan. I smiled slightly despite the tension. Captain Rodriguez was a good man, former Air Force with an infectious laugh and genuine appreciation for contemporary art. He would help lighten the mood when things got intense, which they inevitably would. I showered quickly, threw on a plain white t-shirt and comfortable jeans. Nothing fancy or elaborate. Not yet, anyway. The time for costumes and disguises was almost over. I headed downstairs to the kitchen, made myself a strong cup of black coffee, and stood at the counter, staring out at our backyard. The old pickup truck sat there in the driveway, rusted and beaten up, a physical relic of the life I had allowed everyone to believe I lived. In just a few hours, that carefully constructed life would be gone forever, replaced by something none of them were prepared to handle. I sipped the hot coffee, letting the caffeine wake me up properly, and reflected on yesterday's dramatic confrontation with Jessica. Her shaking hands, her angry tears, the way she had looked at me like I had personally betrayed her by not sharing my business success. Maybe I had betrayed her in some ways, but she had betrayed me too over all these years. 14 years of dismissing my work, sighing at my hobbies, never once asking what I was actually accomplishing during all those late nights at my computer. My phone buzzed again. Diana. Rolls-Royce vehicles have arrived at the Crawford estate. Family members are reportedly freaking out. Are you absolutely certain about this plan? I typed back quickly. Completely certain. See you at the jet. She didn't reply, but I knew she was handling everything with her characteristic precision and efficiency. 3 pristine black Rolls-Royce vehicles pulling up to Vincent and Helen's fancy countryside estate would have stopped them completely cold. I could easily picture the scene. Helen clutching her pearls dramatically, Vincent squinting suspiciously out his window through expensive glasses, Kevin snapping photos like an excited tourist at his first car show. Jessica was probably there too, still angry and confused, trying desperately to figure out how to explain this situation to her parents without looking completely foolish herself. I finished my coffee, grabbed my keys, and headed outside. The old truck grumbled to life exactly like it always had, and I drove the familiar winding roads through trees and farmland toward the Crawford estate. My stomach felt tight, but not from nervousness, more like anticipation mixed with excitement, or maybe just the enormous weight of what was about to happen. When I finally pulled into their circular driveway, the 3 Rolls-Royce vehicles were parked in a perfect row near the front entrance, their engines purring almost silently. The entire Crawford family was already outside, dressed for what they had expected to be a casual weekend gathering. Vincent wore his typical polo shirt, Helen was in a floral sundress, Kevin had on shorts and one of his ridiculously loud Hawaiian shirts. Jessica stood slightly apart from the group, arms crossed defensively, her face tight with barely controlled emotion. They all turned simultaneously as I climbed out of my battered truck, the gravel crunching loudly under my boots. "What exactly is this?" Vincent called out, waving his hand dismissively at the luxury cars. "Some kind of elaborate joke?" Before I could formulate any response, my private jet roared overhead, flying low enough to rattle the estate's windows, its silver body catching and reflecting the bright morning sunlight. The aircraft circled once in a perfect loop, then descended smoothly onto the private airstrip located behind the main house, one I had secretly paid to have constructed years earlier, back when Vincent still thought I was borrowing money from Jessica to pay our monthly rent. The side of the jet gleamed brilliantly with gold lettering, Harrison Digital Arts, revolutionizing creative expression. My company name, my real identity, impossible to ignore or dismiss. Their jaws dropped simultaneously, every single one of them. Kevin let out a loud, "Whoa!" and immediately pulled out his phone to start filming. Helen's manicured hand went instinctively to her chest, her pearl necklace trembling slightly. Vincent blinked repeatedly, like he couldn't trust what his eyes were showing him. "Is that actually your jet?" he asked, his voice shaky and uncertain for the first time I could ever remember hearing. I smiled calmly and casually. "Yes," I said simply. "One of 3 I own. Shall we go?" I didn't wait for them to answer or recover from their shock, just started walking confidently toward the airstrip. The professional drivers, sharp-looking men in perfectly tailored black suits that Diana had hired, opened the Rolls-Royce doors with practiced efficiency, and the Crawford family climbed in slowly and carefully, moving like they were stepping into a dream they couldn't quite believe was real. Jessica lingered behind, her eyes locked intensely on mine. "You're actually serious about this?" she said. It wasn't really a question, more like a statement of disbelief. "Completely serious," I replied, then climbed into the lead vehicle. She followed reluctantly, sliding into the leather seat beside me, her expensive perfume sharp in the air-conditioned cabin. The ride to the jet was conducted in near total silence, the family distributed between the three cars, none of them knowing what to say or how to process what they were experiencing. Jessica stared determinedly out the window, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. I didn't try to start conversation or push her to respond. She needed time to process everything, and I was content to let her work through it privately. When we reached the airstrip, Captain Rodriguez was waiting beside the aircraft steps, grinning widely in his crisp uniform. "Good morning, boss," he called cheerfully, tipping his captain's hat. "Perfect day for flying, wouldn't you say?" I laughed genuinely for the first time in days, clapping him warmly on the shoulder. "Absolutely perfect day, Rodriguez," I agreed. The Crawford family trailed behind me like uncertain tourists, still dazed and confused as we boarded the aircraft. Inside the jet was a completely different world from anything they had ever experienced. Cream-colored leather seats arranged in conversational groupings, polished wood accents throughout the cabin, holographic screens flickering to life along the walls displaying my most valuable NFT collections in rotating displays, glowing colors, and sharp geometric lines, pieces that had sold for millions of dollars to collectors worldwide. Champagne sat properly chilled in crystal buckets, courtesy of Diana's meticulous attention to detail. "Welcome aboard," I announced, turning to face my stunned guests. "Please make yourselves comfortable. We have about an hour flight ahead of us." Kevin immediately flopped into one of the plush seats, grinning like a delighted child. "This is absolutely insane," he said enthusiastically, reaching for a champagne glass. Helen sank down slowly and carefully, her eyes darting around nervously, taking in every luxurious detail. Vincent stood stiffly for a moment, staring intently at the holographic screens. "These digital artworks," he said slowly, pointing at the rotating displays. "These are actually yours? You created all of this? Designed them, sold them, and built the technological platforms they operate on," I explained matter-of-factly. "That's what I've been working on all these years while you thought I was wasting my time." He didn't reply immediately, just sat down heavily, like someone had knocked all the wind out of him. Sarah, Jessica's sister who worked in public relations, looked pale and shaken, her professional brain probably screaming about all the missed opportunities and connections she could have facilitated if she had known the truth. David, Jessica's cousin who had once rudely dismissed one of my early business pitches, fidgeted nervously with his tie, avoiding direct eye contact. He knew he had blown a massive opportunity years ago, and the regret was written clearly across his face. Jessica remained standing, arms still crossed defensively. "Where exactly are we going?" she asked, her voice tight with controlled tension. "My private island," I said simply, like it was the most natural thing in the world. "You'll see everything soon enough." Captain Rodriguez's voice crackled professionally over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, please fasten your seatbelts. We're ready for takeoff." The jet engines hummed powerfully, and we taxied smoothly down the runway, lifting effortlessly into the clear blue sky. I leaned back comfortably in my seat, watching their reactions carefully. Vincent gripping the leather armrests, Helen sipping champagne like it might calm her jangled nerves, Kevin taking excited selfies with the aircraft interior. Jessica sat directly across from me, her eyes locked on mine, searching desperately for something familiar in this completely transformed version of her husband. "You're actually enjoying this whole spectacle," she said quietly, just loud enough for me to hear above the engine noise. "Maybe I am," I admitted honestly. "It's been a very long time coming." She didn't smile, didn't nod in understanding, just looked away toward the window. The jet climbed higher into the atmosphere, the Crawford estate shrinking to miniature size below us, and I felt it happening. The psychological weight finally lifting, the elaborate mask completely gone. They hadn't seen the island yet, hadn't experienced even half of what I had prepared, but they would soon, and when they did, there would be absolutely no possibility of going back to the way things were before.